Hey there everybody, how's it going? So I'm P0 or PO17 as some people like to call. Right here in front of me, as you can already see, I have my JVC iart here, and I have a red screen. And why do I have a red screen? Well, it's pretty obvious from the looks of that. So what exactly is that? A little bit of discoloration there from this big ol' red screen. And for those who haven't read the title of the video, this is a purity issue. Now, with bigger screens, such as this one, being 32-inch as compared to, say, a 19 or a 14-inch, 32-inch and even 36-inch screens are much more prone to getting purity issues, and the reason why is because they have to shoot electrons from the center of the screen all the way out to the corners, and the bigger the corner is, or the further out the corner is, the harder it is to accurately shoot the electron to where it needs to go. So what will usually happen with these larger sets is they have magnets on the back of them to help direct the electron beam to where it needs to go, especially towards the corners. Now, I fixed the magnets, or I wouldn't say fixed necessarily, well, I did fix them, but they were in different positions when I got this TV. And the reason why I moved them in the first place was just due to the fact that it was making the screen really weird in terms of its geometry. For example, the top left corner up here was actually bowing outward, and I can show you on this grid pattern here, or this monoscope pattern actually is a better one. So this top left was actually bowed out that way, really badly, and this bottom right was actually basically being pulled down. And that was due to magnets pulling the, the electrons to essentially I guess you could say the wrong spot. But it wasn't really the wrong spot necessarily. It's kind of weird. So it did fix the purity issue, however, it was at the cost of geometry. Now, I took the liberty of taking every single magnet, except for, I think, 1 or 2 convergence strips that sit underneath the yoke, and move them. And I'll show you back here right now. As you can see, I have the whole back of the set off. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean. So this looks pretty ugly, but essentially that's one of the magnets. So that here, right here with this little blob, that's a convergence strip, and I didn't touch the convergence strips. But I did touch these magnets that were essentially trying to correct purity on the screen. Now, I've been working these magnets for a very long time, and I got them in positions that actually work much better than what they previously were at. This one, except, no, I didn't really have to change. I actually moved it and then moved it back. This one, there basically was no magnet here, and then I moved a magnet from the other side to this side to do so, and I'll show you here on the other side as well. So this is a spot where one of the magnets was, and of course that's where it is now. And then under here, this is where a magnet was, and I believe is now gone because I moved it to the other side, because it didn't actually need it. So, with that being the case, if the geometry is now fixed, why is purity now bad? Well, that's because I moved the magnets. And when you move the magnets, depending on the position you put them into, it can affect purity. So how do you fix it? Well, back here, again, there are these rings back here, specifically these 3 pairs. So the 2 back pairs, so this right one and then the middle one, those are your convergence rings, and then of course this front pair is your purity rings. Now, when it comes to convergence adjustments and whatnot, typically speaking, don't touch the purity rings because they already should be set from factory to essentially keep the screen from looking discolored, such as what I showed you on here earlier. So if we go back to the white and RGB screen, let me turn that off. So you can already see there's a slight bit of darkness or slight blueness to the bottom here if you look at the whole screen. And if you switch to red color, it shows it pretty well. Don't worry about this here, that's just from the camera. But that essentially shows it. And if you flip to blue, usually blue will show the same thing, but it will show red instead of whatever it is now. Obviously, because the purity is affecting the red portion of it, it's not going to show up in blue. So you have to, if you're playing around with the purity rings, double check your red color and double check your blue color, because those are the two that are going to really affect it the most. You can check green, but typically you don't need to. There is a slight discoloration down here during green, but it's not like super bad. Basically all it is the phosphors are slightly darker right there, just because the phosphors are being pulled to red, or pulled to blue. So, how do we go about fixing it? Well, like I said, we're going to fix the purity rings, and I'm going to do a little bit of a video trying to show you how exactly it affects it. So, give me 1 sec, and I will get it set up. Alright, so I got the camera positioned now on the tripod, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be loosening the yoke tensioner, or not the yoke tensioner, sorry, the ring tensioner. On Convergence rings, there is a couple methods, and actually, you know what, I'll take the camera off the tripod to show you back here. So, back here you see the little nubs that stick out right here. So this is actually a tensioner, and you turn that, take the whole thing and just turn it that way to loosen it up, and that will loosen all these rings. Now, as you can also see, there was some adhesive on these rings, but there's no longer adhesive stuck to it because I moved them. But there will sometimes be a tensioner like that, depending on the TV that you get or the video monitor that you get. But sometimes they don't have that, and usually how they keep them tight is they glue them together. So just be aware of that if you're doing an adjustment on your own. If you don't have a tensioner like this, which I hope your TV does, because it makes its life like so much easier, that you just be careful whenever you go to put the rings into their correct position and then either adhesive or tension them back on. With tensioning, all you have to worry about is by accident turning some rings while you're tensioning it back tight. So what I usually like to do is I like to put pressure on the rings just by holding them and pressing to the left and then pulling up and rotating it around. Or for just rings that don't have a tensioner like this and instead are tensioned by a screw, usually you just want to glue them in and then hope that they stay in place. But yeah, so anyways, let me put this back on the tripod and show you what exactly it's going to look like whenever I do this adjustment. So there we go. Let me put this in frame fully, and that should be good enough, right there. Okay, perfect. So as I said, I'm going to go turn this ring, loosen it up, and already the green and the magenta rings have already moved, but don't worry about that. And then I'm just going to adjust accordingly. So typically with these purity rings, I'm just going to move them as a pair. So let's see here. So as you can see, just by moving them, it did reduce the purity a bit by quite a lot. And here, let me move it a little bit more to show you. So there you go, that purity's gone. However, you have to go back and check a few things whenever you're doing so. So even if the purity is gone from that corner, you still have to check your blue and your red, because you will do a couple things whenever you move the purity rings. The first is you're actually changing the position of the geometry. So you might not be able to tell, but this top and bottom right corners now have shifted more to the right. Or sorry, now have shifted more to the left, and therefore there's a little bit of a gap here and here, which I'm going to have to fix later in the service menu. And there's also a tiny bit of purity up here that has changed for the blue. It's not that bad right now, but I'm just going to adjust it a little bit more and see how effective I can get this purity issue taken care of. So I'm going to do that off camera, but essentially that's what you're looking for to do, is to do that. Now it will affect convergence, so what I like to do too is after I play with the purity rings, I also work on the convergence rings to ensure that I get everything properly set. And there's usually a position on the purity rings that you want to get into, which will have your convergence set for the most part really well. because if you do turn your purity rings a whole bunch different ways, it can disturb the convergence for all three guns, or all three colors, and you want to just make sure that that doesn't really happen. So, like I said, I'm going to do this a little bit more off camera just to try and get it as set as I possibly can. I'm ideally attempting to eliminate all purity and fix all the convergence issues all in one, but that might not happen, so we'll see what I can do. You can only do so much with a 32-inch set anyways. Alright, so I just finished adjusting a bit of the purity, and as you can see here, once I move this back a little bit, that the purity is pretty well set, and that's for both red, green, and blue. So as you can see here, green is nothing, blue pretty much has nothing. There's maybe a very, 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 very tiny bit of purple in here, but honestly, it's not really that bad. Now, of course, with this, this might not be a permanent fix due to the fact that as the Earth rotates, at different points in time of day, or even during the months, you may get a bit of purity issues just in general because of the Earth's magnetic field. So do keep that in mind. It's not always permanent unless you really want to play with magnets and have it set that way. So I really just do this just because I'm a perfectionist in a way. And unfortunately, you can't achieve perfection with these CRTs, but you can at least try your best. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to monoscope, or actually no, I'm going to go to convergence here, because you may have noticed, actually it doesn't really show too well, but the convergence is messed up now. So now I have to fix that. So let me go ahead and play with the rings a little bit to show you kind of what needs to happen. So if I adjust these two rings back here, which is magenta and green, hold on a sec, actually the tensioner's a little tight. I'm not sure how well it catches in the camera, but it does adjust, and I'm going to go ahead and adjust red and blue as well. So, right now, from what it looks like, is I need to bring in... Oh, this is actually going to be tougher than I thought. I'm going to have to figure out the position of where everything needs to go, but effectively speaking, as you can see, the more I move these rings, the more adjustments it makes to the colors, because it's effectively moving the red, green, and blue guns around. And what you're trying to do with convergence is just align them. So, I'm going to do that a little bit off camera, but effectively, you're just trying to match red and blue, and then you're trying to match the combination of red and blue with green. That's why there's two pairs of rings there. The middle one in particular is the red and blue ring, and then the two in the back is the magenta and green. And when I mean magenta, I mean the combination of red and blue. So, let me show you again. So this is what I'm turning. So if I'm playing around with these here, so if I just shift these two, that adjusts the position of red and blue on relative to the screen. If I spread these two rings apart, it's going to move one of the colors around and kind of widen the gap. And if I close them up, it's going to decrease the gap in between. And since the screen here, the convergence isn't like completely one-to-one across the entire screen, what will happen is you might get it converged in the middle, but then the corners might be misconverged, or you might get one corner very well converged and the other one's completely misconverged, or in most cases, you might get all three corners and the center converged, but one corner's off. And that can be due to a few other things. For example, the yoke. With your yoke position, you can sometimes have a corner that's a little bit off, just because the yoke isn't properly seated, or is properly seated but just can't do it per se. And of course there's also dynamic convergence adjustments, which some TVs have. This one has it right here. So this potentiometer will adjust dynamic convergence, and all that's really doing is just playing around with the corners a little bit to try and get them to line up. So I'm going to be messing with all that to get this convergence set back to where it is, and hopefully it looks much better. And then, of course, afterwards, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the geometry, because now the geometry has shifted to the left from me playing with those purity rings. So give me just like a minute. Well, in your case, it's going to be a second, but yeah. Alright, so convergence for the most part has been taken care of after I did the purity. It's not going to be perfect, of course. As you can see here, there's a little bit of splitting. Overall, there's just a little bit of splitting everywhere here and there. It's mainly just due to the result of this bottom right. So if I actually did have the entire screen set, for the most part, as good as it can get, this right side down here on the bottom would be very off. So I have to make a compromise, unfortunately. So for example, as you can see, if I zoom in, it's not properly aligned. For the most part, most people aren't really going to notice it or really care. I personally do, and especially with this tube is extremely detailed and very fine, so there's not really any scan line gaps in between or anything like that. So some color misconvergence is going to really change the image quite more drastically than your normal CRT. For example, this thing. This really won't change all too much if you have a corner that's not so good, but unfortunately I can't do that with this, so I have to make a compromise on the entire screen. So while it's not perfect, it's for the most part okay. So now that that's done, we can take a look here. And now, as you can see, the screen is actually slightly to the left. And I'll show you here on the grid pattern as well to get a good display. So all I have to do now is just adjust this a little bit to the right, and I should be good. Alright, so all I'm going to be doing now to adjust the service menu is I'm just going to hit sleep timer, then display and video status at the same time. That'll, of course, bring up my service menu. Then I go to deflection and search for H position. And it's as simple as that. So that was pretty quick and easy. Let me go to monoscope to double check the position because I like monoscope a little bit better for this. So we just see here, the screen's pretty much as good as it'll get. I'm probably going to leave it right here, and that should be about good enough. And if I ever decide to make any future adjustments, because I am going to be comparing a before and after screenshot of this to make sure that it looks up to par in my standards. And yeah, so that's pretty much all there is to it. That's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do now is just, like I said, double check over the pictures. I'm going to play a couple games on it, see how it looks. Nothing too fancy. In fact, let me go ahead and do this right now. So, as you can see on the screen now, I just turned on Super Mario World, and this is typically the screen that I use for just making sure that everything looks okay. Mainly due to the fact that Super Mario World has borders here. Can actually show you where your picture is set relative to the game. It's very handy, actually. I actually like Super Mario World for being a calibration tool on top of a really fun game. So, everything looks pretty good for right now. In fact, you know, there's not too much blurriness on the corners. There's not too much misconvergence either that you can really notice. If you look really closely in between the lines, yes, you can see a little bit. But honestly, because of how thin these scan line gaps are, it's not super bad. All you really want to make sure is that there's not really much purity issues. And then, of course, you don't want too much misconvergence or it will really make the picture look just completely off. For solid colors, it's not so bad, but for white and for anything like yellow or even just any bright colors that involve the red, or depending on what color gun is a little bit misconverged compared to the other two, will really stand out. And that's typically why Sony sets, especially in my experience, have had more convergence or more noticeable convergence issues in general, because those ones tend to stand out a bit more. So, anyways, because everything looks pretty good so far, that's pretty much it for this video. I know it's a bit of a long video, but I hope some people were entertained or at least more informed now about, in general, adjusting purity, adjusting convergence just a little bit. As I said before, typically speaking, you don't want to touch the purity rings, but because this is a very large set and they have purity issues for the most part, your mileage may vary. I decided to do so just because I kind of know what I'm doing whenever it comes to purity itself, and kind of what are the things that are going to happen if you do adjust the rings. Because, like I said, it does adjust the position of the geometry for the screen, as well as it does mess with the conversions. And at times, too, it can actually mess with the bowing of the screen, especially on these flat CRTs, so you're going to want to be careful of that. But anyways, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching this video, And hopefully, if you have to make a convergence or a purity or any sort of adjustment, you watch this video and get informed. And then hopefully, if you end up having to make the adjustment, it goes well for you. So thank you.